All right, everybody. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of In Liberty and Health. Today is episode number 455, and I just got off with our my mutual my guest and I's mutual friend Nico House. So make sure you go check out that show. We're going to be talking about the Abraham and the Isaac Accords. My guest today is very, very well informed on these topics. She's a great follow on Twitter, so I'm really, really excited to have her back on. It's been quite a while, and I'm glad we could finally get everything situated. So before we get into all of that, make sure you go to all the links below where you can find my guest, everything she's got going on, and of course, everywhere you can find me, support me. Go check out A Common Crown. We just released a new song last week. Go check out Slow Down. It's up everywhere. Really good feedback so far, so hopefully you like that. Of course, go to tigerfitness.com, use code Kyle at checkout to let them know that you support the Matovic family. I got a little girl now, so we have to make sure that she's as well off as she could possibly be. And of course, Fox & Sons Coffee, use code Kyle at checkout to let them know that I sent you. And other than that, let's get into today's show. And welcome back to the show, Miss Fiorella, Isabel. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing good. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, of course. Well, where are you at right now? Last time we talked, you were in Moscow. Are you still there or are you somewhere else?
I'm actually traveling for the time being. Right now, I'm in Latin America. I'm in South America in Lima, Peru, actually.
Mm. I'm very envious. We have about 2 feet of snow. If I opened up that window there, you could see the couple feet of snow, and I'm very very jealous because the weather down there, I'm sure, is much nicer than it here is in the northeastern corner of the United States.
Yeah, I skipped winter this time from being in Moscow. And yeah, I decided I didn't want to be there this winter. And actually, it was a good idea because they also got a lot of snow as well as you guys. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's always a good thing. So, I guess since you're in Latin America, I'm really curious. What is the? And I hate to use this word, but what's kind of the vibe there after kind of the last couple months? Because obviously there's been a lot going on there, and with Marco Rubio at the head of pretty much running the government's foreign policy, the U.S. government's foreign policy, there's obviously an intense focus there because he just has this obsession with Latin America. His family was exiled from Cuba or whatever. He probably lied about some of that, but he has this big heart on for Latin America. So, um, I don't know that much about Lima or Peru or anything like that, but obviously, like the big ones are Argentina, Venezuela, Cuba, Honduras. Those kind of seem to be the big ones in focus. How is it down there? And obviously, I want to get into the Isaac Accords a little bit later, but yeah, how do people kind of feel about everything going on?
Well, there's a lot of different opinions. It depends on where you go. For
Sure.
example, here, because it's very much captured by the West and the Western mentality, the thought is, Venezuelans are now going to go back home because you got a lot of Venezuelan immigrants in Peru, and you had also some Venezuelan immigrants go to Colombia. And so a lot of that is centered around like, oh, well, they get to go back home. The reality is a lot of Venezuelans have been leaving the other countries in the last few years and returning to Venezuela. I know because I have a lot of family friends that are Venezuelan, and some of them are not even Maduro sympathizers, but they have said that businesses were back on track, that things were opening up, and especially the ones that were in Florida, they said that things were working out. I don't know if you know, but the Maduro government had opened up conversations with the opposition in Venezuela, and that was allowing a lot of these business transactions to continue. And that was long before Delcy Rodriguez came in. So that's been ongoing. Actually, Venezuela and the United States have been tied for the longest time, and not just economically but culturally as well. And so in essence, you have the opinion that this could be a positive thing for Venezuelans. But on the other hand, you have a very, very acknowledged truth, which is, wow, the United States literally kidnapped a sitting president. They ousted him, and nobody did anything about it. nobody was able to hold up any sort of international law. I mean, that went out the window with Gaza.
Mhm.
And, and so the US can come after anybody. And that was pretty much the sentiment from Gustavo Petro in Colombia. Gustavo Petro was initially thought by many to be a milquetoast liberal, that he wasn't going to do much, that he was going to succumb to everything that the United States wanted. And that didn't happen. That didn't happen. He has been quite annoying, I would say, quite of a nuisance to the United States. He has said a lot of things that are quite, I would say, provocative for a president in Colombia's position, because remember, Colombia was the only NATO partner in Latin America, and so they came from the Uribista government. The Uribista governments were far more neoliberal, far more pro-US, but they thought they could convince Petro to play ball, and he really hasn't been playing ball. I mean, he has his opinions about Venezuela, but he still says we're not going to allow this to happen here, which is why Trump is targeting him and sanctioned him as well. Then you have also, in the same way, you have the Brazilian president Lula da Silva, who is also, by the way, this year, Brazil and Colombia will have elections, and this is kind of also why I'm here. Where I'm going to be looking at these elections and how that is so important, because that's going to really tell you where everything is going. And unfortunately for Venezuela, I see what they're doing, and I see how that they are trying to get Maduro back. Simultaneously, though, there are many theories that he got sold out, blah blah blah. I'm not really seeing evidence of that from the ground perspective. What I am seeing is a very much realistic, pragmatic approach from Venezuela, that they really don't have a choice. I mean, nobody's going to come to their defense. Unlike a lot of people that are analyzing things coming from a multipolar world and all this like crap, essentially, is what I've come to conclude about it. It's not an opposition. It's simply, more people at the table, more powers at the table. It's not going to mean that China and Russia are going to ideologically rescue uh, these countries like Venezuela from the United States. They're not going to get involved. They didn't get involved. And so essentially, what countries like Venezuela, like Brazil, and Colombia have in front of them is basically to work with the US or pragmatically figure out a way to try to maintain control of their countries. And it's getting more difficult as each of them are being targeted. And the next one, of course, is has been Honduras. After Honduras, next year will be Nicaragua, and there really won't be much opposition left to Western hegemony. And I think this will lead us right into the Abraham and Isaac Accords, because the what it looks like the United States is building is a gigantic wall of power in order to build up and compete against China. And that's their ultimate competitor. I mean, you have
Mhm.
Russia that's proven itself a military might, that's proven itself a global power, which is why I think you will see negotiations this year between Russia and the United States, not because the United States wants to, but because they they actually, or they see Russia as an equal, but rather because they see that Russia is right now a power they can get a transaction from, and they are better than, for example, the EU. They're in a better position than the EU. They have gas, they have energy, they have resources that the United States can work with. This is why you've been seeing the discussions in the about the Arctic going on for so long. I mean, since February of 2025, almost a year ago now, they were discussing the Arctic and the minerals there and the minerals in the Donbass. So that's why you're going to see it, I think, this year, an end to the Russia Ukraine war, in spite of all of the things that the US is doing to Russia, in spite of the, for example, the capture of the two Russians in the vessel, who were just released, by the way, according to Maria Saharova. In spite of everything that the Russians have gone through, they're still willing to negotiate with the US, which, in my opinion, they have to tread very carefully, same as Venezuela. So there is this buildup coming from the Donroe Doctrine, right? There is this buildup coming. It never went away, but it's been strategically planned for a long time, and now they're um, doing all of this. They're acting it out, but they are overextending themselves. The global elite, not just from the United States, but from Israel, clearly, and they are building this gigantic power wall. And the only opposition to that would require the power of somebody like China, perhaps Russia, but they're not necessarily opposing it. They have intertwined economies, especially China and the United States.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is an age of normalization, an age of pragmatism, an age of realpolitik. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people get lost in the ideological, oh, they're going to rescue, Russia and China are going to save us. And I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, I agree. One thing that was surprising to me was to see everybody, and not just like people in left alt media, but people in both sides of the media saying, "Oh my God, China didn't go defend, Venezuela. Or Russia didn't come to the defense of Venezuela." I'm like, they first of all, they don't really have the capacity to. Like, neither of those countries really have force projection in the same way the United States does, and that's not the way their alliance works. Like, Russia sold Venezuela arms, but they were never going to come militarily defend Venezuela. It's just not. That's not what they're concerned about. Like, obviously they don't want that to happen, but like they're not going to do that. So the idea that they were going to is just like this westernized idea of how countries operate. And China and Russia and Iran don't operate like the US does. And people make this false assumption that they do. They just don't. It's so what's interesting to me about this whole Isaac Accords deal is that right now Venezuela seems to kind of be like the first domino to fall. And this is obviously Marco Rubio's wet dream. He's wanted to do this for, well over a decade now, if I recall correctly. And it seems like they're having some trouble with it because I just saw a tweet about I can't remember what website it was from, but yesterday they threatened again to use military force if Delcy Rodriguez does not cooperate with the West. And our mutual friend Nika was mentioning how like Delcy is a very, very competent politician. She's a very competent leader, and she goes and meets with all the like elected officials all over the world. And basically, like the government of Venezuela is still very much so together. They still recognize Nicolas Maduro as the leader. So basically the only way the US can really work out the situation of basically having Venezuela be like a satellite of US hegemony is from the militarily occupy the country, but you have a 4 million person standing army, and plus they defend all their gas depots with the military as well. So the way that the US can really handle this situation is going to require boots on the ground, but Trump has to balance his, the midterms with, trying to occupy Venezuela, which no Americans are going to stomach. So I think he really put himself in a pickle. And yeah, everyone is kind of doing cuck chair politics where they're saying, oh, this felt so good to take Maduro. But like long term implications, first of all, we don't know. Right now, it seems relatively okay. But, a couple months down the line, I guarantee you, Delcy Rodriguez and the rest of, the Maduro government is going to be like, yeah, we want to do things the way that we were doing them. Like, you took our president. Yeah, that sucks. But like, we can still run as a government. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, that was according to the Venezuelan officials and other sources on the ground, that was the actual intent. Maduro had left a plan in case he was gone. And I think Maduro did know that something was coming. I don't think he knew the exact time that this was happening, but I think he knew something was coming. And instead of escaping, right, like say Bashar al-Assad did with the help of
Mhm.
Russia, right? He stayed behind, and people were actually killed, and Americans were actually injured. With the
Mhm.
pushback in that they haven't really focused on that, but that happened. So
Right.
this wasn't like he was just given up. No, that there were Cubans that were killed. There were others that were killed in this entire ordeal, and so you're absolutely right. I never thought that we were going to have the GI Joes on the ground doing hand to hand combat with the Venezuelans. They're just not going to do that. It would be another Vietnam. and in the U.S. is just not capable on that ground. Very much like Israel has had a hard time even capturing Hamas. Hamas is still around. They're not
Right.
disarming, right? So it's just kind of they have very similar strategies, and that strategy wouldn't have worked, which is why they did what they did. They did a whole what they look at as a clean cut extraction, a military operation where they just kidnap Maduro as a narco dictator or narco trafficker that will be, of course, subjected to prosecution in the United States. And that way they had the excuse. Now, once here, they admitted, okay, well, he's not really a, a narco trafficker, which we all knew. We didn't have to be told
Right.
that, but I think that they did actually shoot themselves in the foot, very much like they're shooting themselves in the foot, quite literally, in the domestic policy of the U.S.
Mhm.
because they have acted out so brazenly, so overtly that people who once supported Donald Trump, whether it was for the Epstein files, whether it was for him supposedly going to take on the deep state, whether it was for him going
Laughable.
to you really take on the surveillance state, really support free speech, everything that this administration has been doing has been not fulfilling the promises he made. And to a lot of the Latinos that supported Trump, and I can definitely speak on this. I have Latino relatives that were Trump supporters, and they have shifted their view of
Mhm.
Donald Trump because they see him going overboard. Because Donald Trump started, well, not him literally, but his administration, we have seen the persecution of people with legitimate papers, with legitimate visas, with actual citizens being caught in the crossfire or killed now. So you see a lot of those Venezuelans, a lot of those Latino community members that supported Donald Trump. They saw also the capturing of these people by unmarked, unidentified, non-badged officials, supposed police, being put in dark vans, being taken away to indiscriminate places, undisclosed, prisons, and they're like, okay, this is a little much. Like, why are you doing this? And so there's been a lesson support for this administration. And the problem with that is you already have the Democrats exploiting that to their own benefit. You have Barack Obama tweeting about this as if he wasn't a war criminal himself.
Right.
And so what we're seeing here is that there is a radical shift taking place, and I think the knowledge of people are starting to become aware of what's going on. And Venezuela itself has something we don't. They have a very unified group of people, which
Mhm.
is why you saw members of the opposition marching with the Chavistas, who they don't get along with, because Donald Trump kidnapped their president and they saw that as crossing a line. That's their guy. Even if they don't like him, that's their dude. They shouldn't have gone in. They shouldn't have kidnapped him. That's crossing a line that nobody should cross. That people, any other, if anybody decided to get rid of Trump because we're causing so much damage in the world and kidnap Donald Trump, what would happen, right? That's unimaginable. But we do this all the time. And so I think that was done so overtly that people were like, "Oh my goodness, like okay, now we see." And that's actually united a lot of Venezuelans, and it also has united people behind Delcy Rodriguez, despite the online media bots, despite
Mhm.
all these things. You see the people of Venezuela marching all the time, and you see that they have a plan. The Chavistas are still in charge. Donald Trump has to talk to them. He has no choice but to talk to them because they're still the ones in charge. And that doesn't look like it's going to change unless there's a forceful removal of Delcy.
Yeah, and like I think both you and I kind of recognize, it's just like that kind of military action right now would be so unpopular. It would be political suicide. Even like vast majority of young people opposed to this whole Maduro operation. Like, yeah, people are like, oh yeah, this is cool. But I'm sure you've seen a lot of the chuds kind of saying, like, oh, well, this was so impressive. I can't believe we did this in 88 minutes. And like kind of looking at it now, I'm like, okay, so you had the CIA on the ground, no confirmation, but they kind of authorized it. So I'm like, okay, if you authorized it and they already sent troops there once, I highly doubt that they didn't do it again. And then you had this whole naval blockade on the country for months at a time. I would hope that you would be able to carry out an efficient operation if you were surveilling a country for months and months on end. And so, like, the people that are just getting hard on about this, it's like, okay, well, what about Americans now at this point? And like you said, ICE, I'm an immigration restrictionist. I support, deporting people, but at the same time, you don't do this by sending unmasked people in and then killing Americans, like, and killing an American who had a gun that you took off of a dude and then had 7 dudes on top of him and shot him in the back. Like, that's not the way you do things.
Yeah, I think it crossed the line because even hearing people that support deportation say that, and you're not the only one. Like I've
Right.
heard so many people who say, "Okay, I support curtailing immigration. I support protecting our borders." But now this is another level, and I knew it was going to be. Look, I've been talking about the fact that the immigration issue is you have Palantir tied to ICE. You
Right.
have the surveillance mechanism that is extremely, extremely dangerous, extremely technocratic. You have that being used to securely watch these people, surveil them, and help put them in prison. Well, that was never going to stay only with these people. It was going to literally go to American citizens. And what's happened is now you have two dead American citizens. And what next? That it's happened. Like they came after them then, and now it's everybody. So now people are kind of reassessing, like, is this really about immigration,
Mhm.
or was it always about pushing more laws to take away our civil liberties? And right now, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, like all of the amendments essentially are
Mhm.
in jeopardy because now they're saying if you protest, you shouldn't you could get shot, or they're saying you shouldn't protest. Basically, you shouldn't go out there. Well, I was saying the same thing during January 6th when people were being called domestic terrorists, as I am
Right.
now. The thing is, there's a very little consistency coming from a lot of the right. And so,
Mhm.
this is in a way so related to what we're talking about because it is US imperialism, it is US foreign policy, the way
Right.
we have established our dictate, the way we have put people into sanctions, get thrown bombs on innocent people, the way we have unleashed our weapons to get a certain political outcome. Well, in that same way, now we're doing it to our own citizens. And this is only the beginning, I think, of what's to come. They do want the powers that be want a civil war. They want people to turn on their neighbor. And I think if people fall for that, that's not going to gain us to anything. I think people need to be very aware of how to organize and protect their rights in a way that really points the aim at the correct people, the people that are actually trying to cause people, Americans to fight each other. And I think this kind of shifted that because Alex Preddy was a person that worked for the VA. He was somebody that believed in the Second Amendment. He was somebody that these people, a lot of them should have liked, and he was somebody that often was really into would have saved somebody, whether it was an ICE agent or a veteran or anybody. Like, so it kind of, I think, puts a dent in the whole left right paradigm because now it's like, okay, who's next? Is it going to be another person? And that is our foreign policy come home. ICE agents are largely trained similarly to the IDF, the same way
Mhm.
as some of our law enforcement.
Yeah, and some of the ICE agents are trained by the IDF, and I know there are IDF intertwined with ICE agents as well. And to your point of the foreign policy coming home, it always does. Like, a lot of the immigration issues are because of we've destabilized so many countries, and it was so funny to hear the immigration restrictionists come out after the whole Venezuela operation say, "Okay, well now they all get to go home." Okay, well that's not going to happen. Like, that's not happening right now because that's a voting block for Marco Rubio and the whole Miami industrial complex. That keeps them in power. So they want to keep these people here so that way they can continue doing what they do. And it's kind of a disgusting thing, especially if you're coming at it from an immigration restrictionist angle, where like we overthrow these countries against the will of the people, and then we cause immigration crises into our own country, which these people are supposedly against, and then now we use them basically as a voting block in their own outside of their own country, and then overthrow their country using taxpayer dollars for then them to either stay here or go home, when it's like, okay, well, why don't we just not destabilize their country and allow these people to decide what fate they want as a country, like we all do here in America to somewhat of a degree, but like we decide this for other people. Like we shouldn't be blowing up and destabilizing other countries, because once again, then you create the situation, the incentive for people to leave that country, and then like we just kind of described there. Now that empire comes back home because ICE is trained by the IDF, and you see them treating people like the IDF does.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's that image going around of, the similarity between what the IDF says to do to Palestinians and then, what an ICE agent is doing right now. And I think I do think this is a moment of realization for a lot of Americans, um, based on the fact that unfortunately we don't often react until something directly affects us. And I think now people feel directly affected. I don't think this is going to go away in terms of like protest. And so a lot of people tend to just immediately go, okay, well, this is rose funded. The reality is that people do organize and people do come together, and there are real communities of people who are don't like the interference of vigilantes that are labeled federal agents, but like they're acting like just straight up vigilantes. They're going into the Ecuadorian embassy. I mean, that like trying to trying to break another international law, because we know that any embassy in any part of the world is basically means that that is the territory of that country. And they tried to go into the Ecuadorian embassy today. That happened. And then they have been going into schools, hospitals. They've been behaving in ways that aren't like the proper way of doing things. And so that's caused a reaction by people in many communities. I know some people in LA and California and a lot of these places that have really organized themselves to say, hey, they're treating them as like Gestapo. They really see them that way. And you're not going to stop that by literally shooting people. You're actually going to increase that point of view. So if you're trying to stop that, then you got to try another strategy. And this is why we've seen Trump and Kirsty Noem backtrack from what they were saying initially, which was that this guy was brandishing a weapon, that he was a terrorist, that he was threatening the lives of police officers. They had to backtrack from that. And now the question of the Second Amendment being in danger is a thing under a Republican president. People have to realize
Yeah.
the irony of this all, right? It's quite insane what's happening.
Yeah, I completely agree. So, I kind of want to tie up some of the Isaac Accords stuff. Do you see Argentina kind of being? I have this theory that Israel and the Israeli people tend to fall into the curse of the eighth decade, right? Where basically Jewish people only last in a certain area for 80 years and then they have to go somewhere else. Do you think that Argentina might be kind of the next center of Zionist power, because Israel right now is an incredibly unstable country that's going through, a lot of war right now, to be completely, to just be completely objective about it. Do you foresee basically all the Israelis and Zionists leaving Israel to go to Argentina at some point in the future? And do you think that's kind of what getting Javier Milei in was kind of about, is kind of securing that part as a Western satellite, kind of like Israel is? And obviously there's like back and forth, Israel influences the US influences Israel. Do you think that's going to happen with Argentina in the future?
It'd be hard to say just Argentina. What I think is
Sure.
happening with the Isaac Accords is that they want the takeover of Latin America. So,
Correct.
ironically, for a long time, the Nazis escaped into parts of Chile,
Mhm.
Argentina, and they grabbed a new identity and they started living there. And then you had actual like fascism develop in Chile, right?
Mhm.
And you have elements of that develop in Argentina, and you have Javier Milei, who was super pro Israel from the very, very beginning. And what I'm seeing now, the fires that have been happening in the Patagonia,
Mhm.
the fires, those are very suspicious fires to me, because this would actually benefit Israel in a takeover like what you're talking about. And a lot of people have been throwing this theory that Israel, Zionists, are behind this. You already have a lot
Mhm.
of Zionists in Argentina. You already have a lot of influence of Zionism in Argentina. You have Zionism pretty much influenced a lot of places that people don't know. You have it in Russia. You have it all over, even the transactions with China. You have Zionism pretty much coming in everywhere. And these accords, like the Abraham Accords before them, aren't established and then go away. They're usually expanded upon. We have seen the expansion of the Abraham Accords since 2020. We're now 6 years in, and what have we seen? The devastation in Gaza,
Mhm.
the fall of Syria, right? And now the targeting of Iran. And believe me, that everything is set up for the US to tackle Iran next. And
Mhm.
they are actually trying to stir things up with Iraq, um, because the incoming prime minister is likely to be a Maliki, and he's extremely pro resistance. And Trump has already made some statements about that, and he's not happy about that. And what they're trying to do is stir up conflicts between ISIS and Iraq in order to distract the resistance from Iran. And they're trying to do a lot of things. And so, what we're seeing here is a global shift towards what I would say is Pax Judaica. Like, it's no longer just the United States. It's literally Israel very much involved in
Mhm.
all of this. So it's not just that it's going to be Argentina, although you're right, I do see Argentina as a central force, but there is much more beyond that. Chile's
Sure.
president now is pro-Israel. You have Bolivia also captured in that way. You have you coming elections in a lot of these countries. Bolsonaro would have been one, right? And now with Lula leaving, we're going to see what happens next. With Petro leaving, we're going to see what happens next. And Peru also has elections this year. They're already pretty much of a mess in terms of politics. Neoliberalism is pretty much on the way in, so that's for sure to be um, done done and done. And as far as Central America, they have an ally in El Salvador
Mhm.
with Bukele, and I honestly, like, I don't really see how that's not already happening. And it's not this conspiracy of, you know, a Jewish takeover. What it
Mhm.
is a strategic, long planned
Right.
imperial takeover, resource takeover, and it serves the interest of what I consider to be actual uh, neo-colonial, very, very far, like, tyrannical type of mentality. I think an international class of predator elites is what I would call them,
Mhm.
against people in general. And we just saw Trump at Davos. So don't tell me the guy that's going to take on the deep state is Donald Trump, because he literally was, you know, surrounded by the actual globalists that he's
Mhm.
supposed to take on. So I think they're just being now more upfront about it. Um, and a lot of the things that are happening are very much so connected, right?
Right, I agree, and I think some people do wanna jump straight to conspiracy, but, like, when you look at it, it just kinda is like, "Oh, well, this makes sense," if you're looking at it from, like, the US empire perspective. So you had brought up Iran there, and I'm sure you and I both probably shared a laugh at the people who said, "Oh, the 12-day war, Trump handled this excellently, and look, the situation's all over." But anybody that knows anything about this situation knew that you just kick the can down the road because, first of all, Iran's not going to stop enriching uranium. They see that as like a sovereign thing that any country should be able to do, and they want to do it. And even through rigorous inspections, they passed all of them. They were the most, one of the most sanctioned countries in the world. I think Russia's number one. Iran's like second or third. So they've been able to withstand the US basically throwing everything but like actual kinetic war at them. Now it seems like that's being taken off, or, kind of being put on the table now. Um, as far as the Abraham's Accords are concerned, you have the UAE, obviously Israel, Qatar, Bahrain, and a few other countries over there that are kind of in this alliance to basically face off. They basically want to prop them up as kind of like the satellite hegemonic power against Iran. Um,
Mhm.
but it seems like Iran's not going to mess around this time. In past incidents, they typically were very restrained, but from everything I've seen, they said if they attack us again, this is all out war. And I threw it up on Upscrolled. I said, if Iran were to launch all out war on Israel right now, they would be 100% justified because what Israel's done to Iran over the last just couple years. Let's even not talk about decades, but just definitely over the last 3 years Iran has every pretext to go to war with Israel, but they're just very restrained. They're very calm, and they try to be diplomatic. But at this point, why would you negotiate with the U.S. or Israel when they're just going to stab you in the back first chance they get?
Yeah, there's a lot to say about Iran. There's two Irans, right? You have the diplomatic side, the president's side, that's far more diplomatic, far more focused on finding solutions than going to war, mixed with the religious and resistance minded side, which is pretty much what defines what Iran is and has been for decades. And when you go to Iran, it is very, very apparent that that's there. I mean, there are obviously people of all varying typical political opinions, but you know, a lot of the lies that are said about Iran, I firsthand know are false.
Mhm.
In terms of being there, the strictness, depending on where you are. Like you're in Tehran, you'll see people, women without a hijab. It's normal in restaurants. It's normal, like especially well, foreigners 100%, but even women who are there, I didn't see people be persecuted who weren't wearing one, who were of Iranian descent, who were locals. So that was just a few years ago. I think that was like almost 3 years ago, 2 years ago. And you a lot of the things that are said about Iran and women especially are kind of laughable because when I was there, women were actually doctors, lawyers. They had high positions, very much like I've seen in parts of like Russia. But they were also very much treated more so like flowers in a way. They were like cultivated to be they understand gender roles there, like masculine, feminine. So they're kind of like there was a different type of treatment. Like women could be educated, but they were also more of a feminine aspect to them. Whereas in the US, we think of things differently, and that's fine. But to force our beliefs on another country, and the reason that you even have that in Toronto is because of us, right? And so like all of these things are kind of laughable, but when you look at how Iran will actually act, it truly depends on what wins over. Is is it going to be the resistance minded aspect where they are looked on as the glue, the center that holds the resistance together? And by the resistance, I mean the axis of resistance. We're talking about Yemen, who has also, of course, been targeted by the West and who will also be has sent threats as well in regards to Iran. So you have Ansarallah, you have Hezbollah in Lebanon, You have Hamas and certain groups in Palestine, and then you have Iran and also certain groups in Iraq. And all of this make up the axis of resistance. And they actually believe, not based on pragmatism, but on the ideology, in a cause greater than themselves. They believe in martyrdom. They see it as a very decent way to reach a positive you know place. Like they see it as a sacrifice that they're willing to make. They don't look at this like the way Westerners do, and they're willing to die for it. In the same way that I would say the one of the only countries that see in Latin America is Venezuela. Has a very They have a very similar resistance minded type of mentality.
Mhm.
um and so, because of that, you will have a lot of people who are willing to go to war to
Mhm.
protect Iran and to protect what it means to the resistance, what it means for them, their sovereignty, and all of that. But you also have, of course, after Raisi was killed, you have a president that's far more he's far more liberal, right? He's not as close to the resistance. And that is very apparent in a lot of the things he has said, a lot of the diplomatic and political aims he has taken. And the Strait of Hormuz, as probably everybody knows by now, is extremely important for oil, right? And the price of oil. And so, yes, the price, of course, would soar, but that's not the only thing that the US is looking at. They will have other mechanisms of offsetting that if they really want to attack Iran. It's not something that's going to stop them, I think, if they really have a plan. And they haven't targeted Iran because Iran is very difficult. It's not Syria, it's not Venezuela. Yes, we
Mhm.
know this. It's different. They have decades and decades of preparation. It's just, oh, they do things differently, and you're right. They're a lot more calm, the same way China and Russia are a lot more calm and
Mhm.
restrained and diplomatic. And so, what I do fear is that because of that restriction, that there isn't um, enough of a pushback. And I hope that there is, but I actually feel like they might be again uh, restrained in their
Mhm.
tactics. And I think that this right now, what we're seeing internationally, is an aim to be more diplomatic, an aim to show some sort of restraint from everybody except the United States and Israel. Unfortunately, when the United States acts like this and a country responds with diplomacy, they tend to see this as weakness, even if they don't say it.
Mhm.
So I foresee I do foresee an attack, but I see Iran being more restrained than I think others would like them to be. I would I wouldn't be upset if they weren't. To be honest, I now
Yeah.
be flat out about that, especially against Israel, obviously. Um, but I do feel that there's a battle going on between the two factions, and we will see which one wins over.
Right. Yeah. And obviously I think all of us here are always for peace and we don't want anybody to get hurt or anything like that. But if there would be any, country in the world that would deserve to have war waged upon it, it would be Israel. Alex Patino, thank you so much for the $10. Really, really appreciate it. Um, as far as that whole situation goes, what do you like? I've seen China and Russia both kind of basically send a strongly worded letter, right? I was talking with Nico about this earlier, where it's like China and Russia's foreign policy is basically like diplomacy and strongly worded letters to the US. Like, hey, you really shouldn't do that, but we're not actually going to do anything. Um, do you think it's going to be the same thing? In my opinion, that's kind of what it seems like, but I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, so Russia and China, it depends on where their interests lie. If their interests are at stake, they will do something. And for example, when it came to Syria, Russia had already attempted to shift Bashar al-Assad towards the Gulf, and by the Gulf states, I'm talking about the ones that pretty much have gone with the Abraham Accords, right? We're,
Mhm,
we're talking about the UAE, Saudi Arabia, all of the same type of Gulf states that have already been compromised by Israel. So they were pushed to Syria was pushed act on that. They didn't, and Russia just wanted to secure their military base, which they did, and so it's funny because Israel went to the U.S. government and lobbied for Russia to keep its military base after the fall of Syria. Since then, Putin just met with Jolani recently, like I think it was today,
mhm,
um, and had conversations about opening, continuing their diplomatic and economic relationship, and blah blah blah. And so, how does that work? Well, you have Russia protecting its interests in Syria. You have Russia protecting its interests, also enacting a base in Libya, by the way. And so, is Russia actually going to act against an attack in Iran if their interests aren't at play? No. But if the issue of oil, if the issue of transport is, will try to resolve this diplomatically. And you're absolutely right. It is strongly worded letters. It is very much, for example, what we saw today from Maria Saharaba on Cuba. We condemn the sanctions on Cuba by the United States. We condemn all of this, but are they going to give them the oil that Cuba needs? Right? Is that
mhm,
going to happen? It doesn't seem like it. And so they tend to offer certain things, mostly words or some other diplomatic exchange, in order to attain something else. And that's kind of like how China works. If China's economic sector will be disrupted, which is very possible,
mhm,
then yes, that there will be an intervention. And I think Iran, fortunately, in some ways, has that level of power. They are a more powerful nation than the other nations we have seen been being targeted by the United States. They have the vast resources as well, the control of the oil, the Strait of Hormuz. And that is something that I think a lot of these people are looking at. And they're going, what can we do to get Iran and the United States and Israel to not go to war? Because this is going to disrupt the global economy. And this is precisely why I think if they are influenced by Russia or China, it will be to submit to some sort of truce.
mhm,
And I think a lot of people are going to be yet again disappointed that Russia and China didn't create a trifecta of Avengers against the United States and Israel. Because
right,
sometimes it seems, especially in the podcast world or in the political world, that people think this, and there's zero evidence to back that up. In fact, there was fake news that China had given Iran these weapons, and that never happened. That's not
mhm,
like it's not happened. They haven't dropped any new weapons. It's all over the internet, but that was never even confirmed by China at all. And even with Venezuela, that was said. But guess what? Venezuela had to, one, pay for the weapons, and two, would have had to been trained on the weapons, which
mhm,
they were not. And these would have
mhm,
been the weapons from Russia. And so, again, a lot of these things are said online. None of them are verified. What I'm actually seeing is China and Russia really commit to this idea of a multipolar world. But what does that mean? It means that they have seats at the table now. They've come a long way, and now they're competing with the United States. And now you have world leaders and world powers, more of them having these seats at the table. If you look at who makes up BRICS, you have countries that often have very close relationships with the United States, like India, right? And I think Saudi Arabia was in the contention as well. And there are other countries in the Gulf that Russia's very close to that have a close relationship with the United States and Israel. So, is it in opposition to US hegemony? No. Is it in opposition directly to the G7, the G20? No. No, it's not. It's simply another bloc that is looking to add more people to the table. But
Mhm.
notice how Venezuela didn't get in. And Lula was supposedly the reason, but I don't think it was just Lula, based on everything I'm seeing. And
Mhm.
and the reality is BRICS is talking about the dollar sinking. Maybe, perhaps that will happen. But what I'm also seeing is the shift from nation states to uh, very, very wealthy people and powerful people. And I said this earlier on a stream today of mine. Real power doesn't lie in the people that are presidents, that are the faces. The real powerful people move in the shadows.
Mhm.
And these powerful people are more benefited if there are transactions and strategic wars, right? Wars do make profit, but at the same time, annihilation doesn't. Like,
Right.
so we will get maybe to the point where, yes, they go to their bunkers and they blow the world apart. I mean, I think that's a very possible scenario in the future, but I don't think we're quite there yet. And I think it's possible, but I don't think we're quite there yet. And a lot of people have been shouting World War III. I think we
Mhm.
are in World War III, but it's a different kind of war that we haven't been used to. So it's been hard for us to recognize it is a war against pretty much everybody that is a
Mhm.
regular person in the world. And I don't think I'm exaggerating as I see a lot of the digital IDs taking over a lot of countries, and being introduced more mechanisms of control of the internet, more mechanisms of surveillance. And there are very few countries left that aren't doing that. And this is also a part of that. And that's also part of the Abraham Accords and what we're seeing with Gaza and this new board of peace
Mhm.
that's going to be established there. This type of surveillance prison on Gaza, moneyless or cashless society. And I think, well, once that's set up there, it will be set up pretty much everywhere else. So, as dire and gloomy as I'm painting the picture, I think, it's worth knowing what's happening in reality and seeing what's happening rather than pretending something else is happening or pretending what we want to be happening is happening. I think a lot of people are
Mhm.
getting a lot of their analysis wrong because they're stuck in their ideologies first rather than in what's actually happening. So they analyze things from their ideological perspective rather than what is. And, the
Mhm.
last few years have, especially made me see things a lot more clearly.
Yeah, I completely agree with you in that respect because I see a lot of people who always message me say, "Oh my God, did you read the new national defense strategy?" And I'm like, "Yeah, like some of the stuff sounds good, but when you actually look at what they're doing, they're still doing the same exact foreign policy that Joe Biden was doing, arming Taiwan, arming Ukraine, arming the Philippines, arming all these countries, bombing Somalia at a record pace." It's really indistinguishable. Like, yeah, they're talking to Putin and Russia, but the negotiations are always non-starters. Like every single time they go to negotiations, they're always starting off with things that just would be obvious to anybody with a thinking brain that Putin would never accept. So I know you didn't want to go too much longer, but if I could, as far as the Russia Ukraine stuff goes, it does seem like they constantly want to push this Article 5 style security guarantees and using frozen Russian assets to rebuild Ukraine. And my understanding is, and from what I can see, it seems like Putin just will not go with that. So um,
Yeah.
I don't know what they're thinking or what the thinking is between the West and the EU. People are saying Trump seems in good faith to want to end this. I can't in good faith believe that when he's doing this mineral deal and still insisting on security guarantees. So I'm curious your thoughts there.
Yeah. So Trump, I think, needs to end this conflict because he ran on it and he
Yeah.
hasn't delivered on anything really. And so he kind of needs to be this. And that's been his whole thing, right? He's the peace president.
Mhm.
He's made the board of peace. He was given the Nobel Peace Prize by Maria Corina Machado, right? Like he wants to be the peace guy. And he kind of actually needs to bring this to an end. Now, the talks between Russia and the United States have been ongoing now for a year, basically. And um, in the conversations, what a lot of people haven't talked about are the economic exchanges, the deals that have been put in place that they are eager to make. And I'll tell you this, there are several Russian businesses coming back to the United States and several American businesses in talks of coming back to Russia. So, what does that tell me? It tells me we will likely see um, an agenda that is actually going to come to an agreement. Will Putin agree to NATO troops on the ground? I don't think so. I have a very hard time believing that he's going to agree to that. So, whatever they say they are giving Russia will have to be backed by security guarantees for Russia. They don't want another Minsk. And they've said this many, many,
Right.
many times. They know what the United States is, they know what the United States is capable of, but do they want to go to a full fledged war with all of Europe and the United States? No, they absolutely do not. They've not looked for that. What they want to do is expand their trade, their economic cooperation. They want to expand their own country. Like Russia is very centralized, and so it's a problem because you have all the money going to mostly Moscow, a little bit to St. Petersburg, and then pretty much that's it. And then they have underdevelopment because it's such a vast amount of territory with vast amounts of resources to be extracted. It's very rich in a lot of minerals and a lot of things, including water. Um, so for Russia, that's also a vulnerability because they are so big, they can be attacked by on multiple fronts. And they also have a very multi-ethnic population. Outside of Moscow, people are more, they think differently. They're more anti West. They're more, I would say, patriotic. In some
Mhm.
ways, they more so care about the sovereignty. Inside Moscow, you have people in Moscow, you have people that tend to feel a closeness to Europe, have always wanted to be a part of Europe. Putin himself wanted to be a part of NATO. They always talked about how Russia is a part of Europe. And you have Kirill Dmitriev right now, who is pretty much the Stephen Witkoff of Putin. He's Putin's one of Putin's top advisors. And I don't know if you've had a look at Kirill Dmitriev's background, but I wrote about this. Kirill Dmitriev has a very U.S. Um, influence type of background. Worked for McKinsey. Has had a close relationship with Jared Kushner, with the Kushners in general, and the entire Trump family for a long time since the beginning of first Trump administration. He has worked for Goldman Sachs. He has sat on various boards of pretty much every other major corporation you could possibly think of. Also had a relationship with Eric Prince, and so what when you look at Kirill Dmitriev, if that profile was a part of any US politician profile, you'd be like, damn, this guy is bad news. We don't want this
Mhm.
guy around. So you have to ask yourself, why is somebody like that advising Putin? Some have been calling him a fifth columnist, and I have a hard time seeing him not be that
Mhm.
because his interests are very much, he has nonstop been very upfront about how he wants Russia and the United States to come together. And he's allowed to go on social media and do that. And I wouldn't say Russia is very restrictive in terms of social media, but they restrict themselves. Like, for example, you wouldn't see something be put out there if they didn't want it seen
Right.
by an official of that level. Now, he doesn't have the official powers in that way, but he is definitely very much in Putin's ear. So I find it very interesting how much he's been up hailing Trump. basically up like going very much pro Republican, right? Pro this administration, doesn't say anything about really what Trump has done in Venezuela, doesn't really talk
Mhm.
about Israel in a negative way. He's just been quite focused on the Russia Ukraine thing. And so, with somebody like that at the helm who's so eager and every day is saying Trump is a peacemaker, this administration is full of peacemakers, they want to bring peace, and also those ties between Russia being a Christian nation and the US being a Christian nation. First of all, like, a lot of Russians aren't, like, religious. Yeah, Putin is, but like a lot of Russians aren't religious, but like the administration is in a way like Orthodox. They talk about it openly and stuff, but just pushing this closeness to America and also pushing back the EU as the problem, it kind of signals to me that they're
Mhm.
trying to build this camaraderie between the United States and Russia, blame it on the EU, put it on the EU. And we knew way back when Victoria Nuland said F the EU. Well,
Mhm.
look at them now. I mean, everything is coming true. And it almost seems like there seems to be an attempt to just have the EU carry the fault. Now, do I think that the United States will look at Russia as an equal? No. Do I think the United States actually legitimately, the deep state wants full peace with Russia? No, I think that there's a means to an end, and I think that that's the way they look at it. And the what they can get out of some sort of cooperation. So yeah, and you know what how Russia has been reacting to a lot of the things the United States has done, like taking out their ships, like backtracking, saying all these things. They'll say, oh, they'll say a lot of words. They'll say they don't like it. They'll say this or that. But at the end of the day, the negotiations are still happening. The conversations are still being had. You have to look at what they're doing, not what they're saying. And that's
Mhm.
something that I think people should look at. So it's not that I think that there's a genuine nature from Washington, but I do think that there's more of an interest in order to get to the next step. I don't think Russia is free of danger in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I worry about Russia's future if they continue any sort of closeness with the U.S. And I worry about anybody that has any sort of deal with the United States, because when have we seen a country ever come out a winner on the other side of a deal with the U.S.?
Right. Yeah, it's a very, very reasonable concern. Fiorella, I know you wanted to be out in a little under an hour, so I apologize for keeping you over. You're very, very knowledgeable. You laid out everything absolutely wonderfully today. So if everybody wants to hear you or see you lay some of this stuff out, where can people find you and support you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Substack, Fiorella. Isabel is my Substack. You can find me on Twitter, Fiorella Isabel M. And then you can also watch. I started a new podcast with my journalist friend Vanessa Beeley. She's extremely well versed in Syria, the Middle East, West Asia. She lives in the Middle East, and so we started a podcast mostly focusing on geopolitics. And she's there, and it's called Critical Perspectives on YouTube. And of course, you can find me at the Truth Wire with my co-host Craig Pasta Jardula, who's now in Minneapolis.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, well, that's all awesome stuff. Craig's awesome, and Vanessa, I've been trying to get her on the show. We'll hopefully eventually figure it out. But no, I appreciate everything you do for Fiorella, and thank you so much for coming on, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and watching. I'll continue. Thank you for the $10 super chat, and until next time, everybody, I'll see you on Sunday, and take care.